Why do some people's fleeting thoughts seem to rearrange the world around them, while yours drift away like smoke? There is no single magic trick, and there is no guarantee that every desire will snap into being. Still, if you want to see why some inner patterns reliably become outer events, it helps to look at a hidden architecture, an interpretive map that has been called the Seven Hermetic Laws. Read through a psychological lens, especially the work of depth psychology. These principles show not only how thought can influence experience, but why that influence is rarely accidental. It follows patterns, charges the imagination, and interacts with the unconscious in predictable ways. Think of it as inner chemistry. In alchemy, they speak of a crucible. Crude ore goes in, heat is applied, subtle processes occur beneath the surface, and gold, if it emerges at all, is the result of many stages. Your mind functions like that crucible. Some mental states are raw metal, greasy, heavy, reactive. Others are refined, malleable, charged with a kind of luminous intention. The Seven Hermetic Laws are not promises that wish alone will conjure a house or heal a body. They are principles for how the mind organizes perception, mobilizes behavior, colors attention, and thus shapes probability. Viewed beside Jungian psychology, the language of shadow, projection, and individuation, these laws gain a map for practice, how to engage the crucible without getting burned. Before we go deeper, a quick note. If this way of approaching hermetic laws through psychology, not belief, resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel. This is where these ideas are explored carefully, without shortcuts or promises of magic. Hermetic teachings arrive to us as aphorisms, terse, symbolic, and meant to be worked with rather than quoted like a factual manual. I'm not asking you to accept their metaphysical assertions wholesale. Instead, consider them as hypotheses about mind and reality. One way to use them is to translate each into psychological mechanism. Mentalism becomes a way of talking about how the mind frames reality. Correspondence shows up as projection. Vibration points to affect and selective attention. Polarity is the logic of opposites and repressed parts. Rhythm reminds us of cycles and timing. Cause and effect maps onto behavior and relational consequences. Gender names inner creative dynamics of initiative and receptivity. When you carry these ideas together, a pattern emerges. Inner states create tendencies, attentional, emotional, behavioral, that make certain experiences more likely. That is not mystical determinism, it is rather conditional probability with moral weight. Mentalism, the mind as ground, and the practice of disciplined imagination. At its simplest, mentalism says, the world you experience is mentally mediated. The phrase often cited is, the all is mind, which can be read metaphorically. The mind is the organizing principle of perception. Psychologically, this is the observation that meaning comes first. When you see a stranger glance your way, a thought arises. They looked at me strangely. And that thought colors your next moves. Curiosity, defensive posture, or withdrawal. The mind is not a passive receptor. It frames, interprets, and amplifies. From a Jungian standpoint, you can read mentalism as a description of how the ego and the deeper self co-construct experience. The ego's narratives, habits of interpretation, and dominant images are like lenses through which the unconscious and the world are filtered. If your prevailing inner story is scarcity, your attention will find evidence of lack. If it is abundance, you will notice openings you once missed. The mind organizes possibility. Example, Sarah is a project manager who wakes each morning convinced that she must please her team to avoid conflict. She carries that assumption like a map. In meetings, she listens for criticism, interprets neutral silence as hostility, and offers conciliations that signal anxiety. Her mental posture creates the social feedback loop she fears. Colleagues respond to her urgency with distance. She reads their distance as confirmation. The thought "I must avoid being wrong" becomes an ongoing experience of defensive labor. If you've already seen how an inner story quietly organizes your experience, write in the comments. Meaning comes before reaction. One simple way to work with this is to begin a daily 5-minute practice of active imagination, focused on a desired inner posture rather than a specific external goal. Close your eyes, embody the feeling, calm, creative, trusting, and let images arise. Don't force content. Record whatever appears. Over time, you retrain the interpretive lens. Mental discipline doesn't nullify circumstance. Training your imagination changes how you perceive and respond, which shifts probability, but it is not a guarantee of immediate material outcomes. Use discernment. Align imagination with concrete action. That's mentalism. Now watch how correspondence transforms an internal pattern into a social mirror. Correspondence. As within, so without. Projection as social alchemy. Correspondence is the shorthand for as within, so without. In concrete terms, it suggests that inner states map onto outer circumstances. Psychologically, the strongest mechanism behind this is projection. When parts of your psyche are unowned, feelings, impulses, judgments, you project them onto others, and then treat the projections as evidence that the outer world matches your inner map. In Jungian language, projection is not merely misperception. It is energy being cast outward to animate a narrative. If you consistently experience others as hostile, consider that hostility may be a cast shadow of what you deny in yourself. Anger, resentment, unmet needs. The projected image then draws relational feedback. People respond to how you contact them. Projection colors tone, posture, and boundaries, and those micro-behaviors generate the circumstances you interpret as proof. Example: Marco suspects that co-workers undermine him. He interprets a colleague's missed message as sabotage and responds with passive-aggressive emails. The colleague, shocked, withdraws and speaks curtly, confirming Marco's belief. Instead of seeing his fear as an interior trigger, Marco reads it as outside truth. His failure to recognize projection makes him both author and victim of the scenario. Adopt a projection practice for 1 week. Whenever you experience a strong negative reaction to someone, pause and journal for 2 minutes. What in me resonates with this reaction? Name the emotion or need. Ask yourself whether it belongs to the moment or to older territory inside you. Projection is not an excuse to sidestep accountability. Naming projected content is the start of responsibility, not a way to blame others for internal work you need to do. You see how mentalism sets the stage, your mind frames, and correspondence supplies the mirror. Next comes vibration, the force that determines what your attention selects. Vibration. Everything moves. How effect sets the field of experience. Hermetic teaching asserts that everything vibrates. Psychologically, this speaks to mood, affect, and the physiology of attention. Vibration is the claim that different emotional frequencies make different things noticeable and possible. Your mood is a filter. It amplifies certain stimuli and muffles others. Beyond subjective perception, mood also mobilizes behavior, posture, voice, and timing in ways that induce certain responses from the world. From a Jung-influenced angle, affect is the motor of the unconscious. What we feel has a momentum that propels perception and action. High arousal states narrow attention and speed reactivity. Low arousal broadens associative thinking but can reduce initiation. Learning to modulate vibration, breath, posture, language changes the field in which experience occurs. Example: Lena wakes up in a low mood. She notices a small traffic delay and escalates it into a disaster story. Everything's against me today. Her speech becomes clipped. Strangers mirror her brusqueness. Small setbacks multiply. The low vibration narrowed her options. Conversely, when Lena practices simple breath regulation and chooses one small, nourishing task first, steeping tea, replying to a kind message, her field opens. She sees more options, and her behavior invites gentler responses. Create a short vibration reset protocol for moments of emotional tightness. 3 slow diaphragmatic breaths, a 30-second grounding sense of your feet, and 1 constructive reframe. Name one thing that is working. Repeat as needed. Affect regulation is not emotional suppression. It is learning to steward the current that carries attention. Never use regulation as a way to avoid necessary grief or to bypass therapy when trauma is present. Vibration explains why mood can change the day. Polarity explains why the inner parts you avoid show up in the extremes you encounter. If this framing is helping you see mood and attention with more precision, take a moment to click the like button. That feedback tells me this depth of work is worth continuing. Polarity. Opposites belong to the same whole. Shadow integration as alchemy. Polarity says everything has its opposite. The world is structured by pairs, light and dark, love and fear, attraction and repulsion. Psychologically, polarity is the logic of disowned parts. What you deny in yourself often shows up exaggerated in the world. Integration means holding both poles as belonging to a single psyche. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow is indispensable as an interpretive tool. The shadow is not an enemy to be destroyed. It is a neglected part that demands recognition. When you fail to assimilate polar qualities, ambition, aggression, desire, they get projected outward in distorted forms. Integration, then, is not suppression, but reclaiming and giving voice and structure to these energies. Example: Marcos and Elena both grew up believing anger was dangerous. Elena suppressed anger and became chronically anxious. Marcos expressed it as domination. Each encountered partners who embodied the missing pole. Elena's partner was blunt and quick-tempered, which terrified her. Marcos's partner was passive, which made him feel unchallenged and lonely. If either could accept that anger is a legitimate energy to be studied and given a constructive role, the external dynamics would shift. Try a 2-minute shadow interview. Identify a behavior you dislike in someone else. Ask yourself, could this be an exaggerated reflection of an unaccepted part in me? What would it feel like to hold that part without acting it out? Name it. Give it a simple sentence of due recognition. I see you, shadow. Facing the shadow can be destabilizing. Integration requires containment, support, steady practice, and sometimes professional guidance. It is not a fast fix and can expose messy material that needs care. The rhythm of descent and ascent shapes when polarities appear and dissolve. Timing matters, and that brings us to rhythm. Rhythm. Cycles govern emergence, how timing and cycles shape transformation. Rhythm speaks to cycles, the ebb and flow that all life follows. Seasons, moods, creative bursts and slumps all operate within rhythmic patterns. Psychologically, individuation is not a straight line, but a spiral. You revisit themes at different depths. The law of rhythm warns us that momentum swings, and that understanding cycle can prevent misreading temporary setbacks as final failure. From an alchemical point of view, the crucible must be heated and then cooled. Phases of dissolution always precede recombination. Jung's descriptions of descent into the unconscious make this clear. There is often a dark night, a sense of loss, and only later a re-emergence. These cycles are not accidents, they are part of inner maturation. And this is where many people quietly lose trust in the process. They expect change to feel elevated all the time, so when the emotional tone drops, they assume something went wrong. In reality, the drop is often the work. If you've ever noticed yourself trying to believe harder during those phases instead of actually inhabiting a new emotional state, that distinction matters. It's the difference between imagining change and letting it reorganize you from the inside. I left something in the first pinned comment that explores exactly this gap, how emotion stops being conceptual and starts becoming embodied, especially during low or ambiguous phases, for those who recognize that struggle. After a breakthrough, Jonah experiences a week of disarray. He mistakes the downturn for regression and panics. He scrambles for quick fixes, adds more effort, more stimulation, more forcing, and in doing so, reinforces instability. If Jonah understood that change includes a consolidation phase, if he treated the downturn as part of a rhythm rather than a failure, he might have paced himself differently. Rest, small rituals, and a simple routine instead of frantic patchwork. One practical way to begin seeing this for yourself is to keep a rhythm journal for 1 lunar month. Notice your energy, creativity, sleep, and capacity for focus each day. After a full cycle, patterns emerge. You begin to see when creation is natural and when restoration is necessary. That knowledge allows you to plan demanding work for your high-energy windows instead of fighting yourself during lows. Of course, rhythm can also be misused. Cycles become excuses when awareness replaces responsibility. I'll change when the mood hits. That's why rhythm must be paired with steady, grounding practices that hold you during low phases. Simple routines, community contact, and clear, small actions that anchor purpose. Rhythm shows us when to go inward and when to act outward. But action without awareness still produces consequences. And that brings us directly to cause and effect. Cause and effect, thought sets ripples, behavior, context, and relational dynamics. Cause and effect is the straightforward grimace. Every action has consequences. In the psychological reading, thought often precedes small behaviors, tone in a voice, a choice of words, the willingness to take a risk that ripple outward and change the world around you. These are the mechanics by which internal states become external patterns. When you repeatedly think in certain ways, you train neural pathways, which bias perception and habit. Those habits produce the microactions that, aggregated, alter relationships, opportunities, and often material conditions. This is the earthy work that Hermetic thinking sometimes leaves implicit. To change outcomes, you must change what you do in alignment with what you imagine. Example: Naomi believes she is unworthy of promotion. Her internal script leads her to avoid volunteering for visible projects. She also underprepares for meetings because she assumes she won't be noticed. Colleagues nominate others. Opportunities pass. The belief produced behaviors that produced the outcome. The thinking did not magically force the employer's hand, but it shaped choices that reduce the probability of promotion. Create a simple feedback loop for 1 week. Each morning, state an intention of one micro-action aligned with a deeper aim. Speak up once in a meeting, submit one idea. At night, record what you did and the immediate effect. Watch the chain unfold. Cause and effect is not moralistic finger-pointing. It is a sober reminder you have leverage in the small choices you make. Use that leverage ethically and with compassion for the context that also shape others' options. Cause and effect connects inner change to external consequence. One last law completes the set of principles that guide creative doing and receiving, gender, the dynamics of initiation and receptivity. But to understand the whole, we must first map these laws onto a human process that many of you know by study or experience: individuation. Mapping the 7 laws onto the path of individuation, how call, descent, and emergence unfold. If the 7 Hermetic Laws are a map, the path of individuation is the route you walk through that map. Individuation, Jung's word for the process of becoming who you are, does not require buying a metaphysical claim. It is simply the arc of encountering your interior complexity and making it conscious. The call, mentalism, and correspondence. The journey often begins with a crack, a disruption that draws your attention inward. A loss, a failure, or an unexpected insight destabilizes the ego's story. Mentalism explains why the crisis forces a change in the interpretive frame. You suddenly notice that your map is making your world. Correspondence supplies the mirror. The outer event is a reflection of unintegrated content. The call is an invitation to stop mistaking the mirror for absolute reality, meeting the shadow, polarity and vibration. Once the call is answered, you typically meet parts of yourself you've avoided. Polarity tells you why these parts appear as opposites. Vibration shows how they arrive charged and urgent. Shadow material often feels like a sudden surge of feeling, desire, rage, shame that you once objected to. Recognizing polarity is the step of refusing the split. You no longer say, this part is me and this part is not me, with moral repudiation. You learn to contain effect without being compelled by it. Descent and active work, rhythm and cause and effect. The descent is the slow work, rituals, therapy, active imagination, disciplined practices. Rhythm teaches patience. Breakthroughs come in cycles. Cause and effect reminds you that inner shifts require outer practice. Intention translates into disciplined micro-actions that reshape context. You do symbolic work, dream study, images, rituals, and you also change your daily choices. The crucible demands both heat and time, reconciliation and emergence, gender and the mature self. When genuine integration occurs, something changes in the way initiation and receptivity move through you. The last law, gender, is about the pairing of initiating energy and receptive form, active and passive, planning and receiving, courage and nurturance. When balanced, they allow you to put vision into the world and to receive feedback and nourishment without reverting to projection or grandiosity. Emergence is not perfection. It is an expanded field in which the self functions with more flexibility and ethical responsibility. I've described 5 of the laws and sketched how the first stages of individuation unfold through them. Already you can see a pattern. The mind frames meaning, projection mirrors content, affect charges the process, polarities expose rejected parts, rhythms demand timing, and cause and effect mechanics ground the work in action. Each step asks for an embodied practice and warns of a risk. Misused, the same dynamics that enable transformation can produce harm, addiction to power, or deepen denial. A practical day in the life to embody the map. Imagine a day designed around these principles. You wake and spend 5 minutes of active imagination, mentalism, setting a tone. During the morning, you note interpersonal triggers and write brief reflections. What is this reaction in me? Correspondence and shadow noticing. When a frustrating email lands, you use a 1-minute breath reset, vibration before replying. Throughout the day, you honor your productivity rhythm, deep work in the morning, lighter tasks in the afternoon, and restoration at dusk, rhythm. You commit to one micro-action aligned with a larger goal, cause and effect, and in the evening you practice a short shadow dialogue with a disowned part, polarity. You end the day by asking where you were initiating and where you were receiving, identifying moments of assertive courage and moments of needed pause. Gender. This is not a formula for instant miracles. It is, rather, the slow alchemical work, applying heat, observing changes, stirring, cooling, and repeating. Gold, symbolic for a balanced and agentic life, emerges not from wishing, but from practice, time, and ethical attention. What often goes wrong, 5 common pitfalls and how the laws explain them. To stay grounded, consider how people typically get stuck. Pitfalls that are instructive because they show the laws in action. One confusing wish for work. Many expect mentalism to mean that imagining enough will make anything happen. The laws show that imagination is the ground, but cause and effect demands practice. Without repeated aligned action, imagination can become fantasy. 2. Moralizing the shadow. When polarity is treated as a moral fault to be excised, energy is merely displaced and later returns more volatile. Integration asks for recognition, not shaming. 3. Mood dependence, masquerading as mastery. Believing you failed because your vibration slipped ignores rhythm. Mastery includes methods to ride cycles, not eliminate them. 4. Projection as excuse. Using correspondence to avoid responsibility, claiming they made me do it, mistakes mapping for excuse. Projection is an invitation to own the internal content. 5. Spiritual materialism. Treating the laws as techniques to manipulate others or accumulate power divorces them from their ethical dimension and risks harm. These pitfalls illustrate the ethics inherent in the map. Awareness without humility invites harm. Technique without integration invites reactivity. The crucible is neutral. Your intention and restraint determine what is refined. The point of crisis, when inner alchemy demands a descent. If you keep working with these practices, many people report a moment that feels like a collapse and a clearing at once. That is the descent into the darker layers of the psyche, the part the alchemists called nigredo, the blackening. It is a necessary stage when the ego is asked to let go of familiar identities so something new can form. In psychological terms, it can look like relationship breakdown, a career shock, or a deep loneliness. It is painful and unpredictable, and the Hermetic map warns us. This phase must be approached with containment and support. Here, the advantages of reading the laws together become obvious. Mentalism helps you notice the narrative you are holding. Correspondence reminds you what mirrors to expect. Vibration teaches you to steady your nervous system. Polarity shows that disowned parts will surge. Rhythm tells you this is likely temporary. Cause and effect invites practical safeguards. Gender helps you balance action and reception during crisis. Without an integrated approach, people either run from the descent or exploit it for dramatic but shallow transformations. A preparatory ritual before descent. Before choosing to dive into deep integration work, do a simple ritual. Write a short, honest letter to yourself. Name one pattern you suspect is running your life. List 2 concrete supports you will hold: a therapist, a daily ritual, a friend. Commit to one small, non-negotiable practice for 3 weeks. 10 minutes of journaling, a breath protocol, or a short walk at the same time each day. This is the ethical container that reduces harm if the descent intensifies. What we have covered so far is the frame and the first 5 laws in their psychological translation. They give you an actionable language for noticing how thoughts become experience through framing, projection, affect polarity, timing, and consequential behaviors. But 2 more laws remain. One focuses on how chains of causality deepen or redirect change, and the other names the inner creative dynamics of masculine and feminine principle, the way intention meets form. Those laws complete the alchemical circuit and show how inner reconciliations become sustained patterns in the world. Before moving forward, pause and sense where you are on this map. Are you still in the call? Have you begun to meet your shadow? Are you practicing small behaviors that test whether your inner changes translate outward? The next section will bring cause and effect and gender into focus, and then move us towards synthesis, how integration reshapes the odds of thought, becoming lasting experience. For many people, the turning point is the willingness to take responsibility for the small, repeatable acts that follow a shift in vision. If you've followed the practices so far, active imagination, projection journaling, a vibration reset, a shadow interview, a rhythm journal, and a nightly micro-action log, you already possess a rudimentary crucible, Real refinement requires you to keep feeding it heat, disciplined attention, community, and above all, ethical intention. The alchemical work is not solitary vanity. It is a commitment to how you influence the world when you step from inner work into the field of relationships and work. There is one more practical framing before we descend further: how to hold accountability and guardrails while you experiment. Integration is not a license for isolation or reckless change. Bring two steady anchors into your practice: a witness and a routine. The witness might be a therapist, mentor, or trusted friend who can reflect back your blind spots. The routine is a small, daily practice that keeps you oriented. Sleep hygiene, a morning page, a short walking ritual. Together, they function like a keel and ballast for the ship that the crucible will steer. In the next part, we will explore cause and effect and gender in depth, and then synthesize the full circuit so you can see how the 7 laws form a working system. We will also walk through a longer example, a figure who moves from denial through descent to partial integration, and the choices they make that either create gold or produce distortions. For now, take stock. What part of your life is most likely to be affected by the mind's organizing power? Where does projection keep replaying? What rhythms do you resist? These are the entry points where modest practices produce measurable change, if you stay steady and ethical about the work. Now let's finish the frame by turning to the 2 laws that close the circuit: cause and effect and gender, and then bring the whole map together with a lived example and a usable program you can test. Keep in mind, these last pieces are where the Hermetic architecture meets earthly responsibility. They are where inner intent is pressed into habit and where creative energy learns form. Cause and effect. Thought as a seed, action as the soil. Cause and effect states that every cause has an effect, and every effect traces back to causes. In practice, this law reminds us that thought without subsequent patterned response tends to dissipate. It is the chain of small choices that translates inner orientation into lasting outer consequence. From a Jungian perspective, ideas and images seed predispositions, neural patterns, bodily habits, conversational styles that become causes. Repeatedly entertained narratives form pathways that make particular reactions automatic. Those micro-actions, timing of a message, tone of voice, willingness to risk, aggregate and produce outcomes. In other words, thought supplies intention, behavior supplies momentum, relationships and context provide the medium where ripple effects play out. Cause and effect is the bridge from imagination to consequence. Example: Aaron believed he was not the sort of person who went after things. He pictured himself as cautious and unambitious, a self-definition that softened his edge. At work, he consistently let colleagues take the lead, declined to volunteer for visible tasks, and hesitated before speaking in meetings. The cognitive story that he was not the type functioned as cause. His small daily choices were effects of that story, which in turn generated further effects: fewer promotions, less visibility, and an inner narrative that felt confirmed. His thinking did not directly force the company's decision, but it guided the behaviors that made the outcome probable. Pick one intention you care about and translate it into one micro-behavior you will perform daily for 2 weeks. Make it small enough to be achievable, but meaningful enough to produce social feedback. For example, speak up with one idea in a meeting, send one short outreach email, offer to take responsibility for a small task. At night, note what happened as a result and whether your inner story shifted. Cause and effect is not a moralistic blame machine. Structural constraints, privilege, chance, and other people's agency all shape outcomes. Use this law as an empowerment tool for what is within your control, your repeated choices, while keeping compassion for the limits that exist around you. Gender, the dynamics that create and receive. In Hermetic language, gender names the pairing of initiating and receptive principles, commonly described as masculine and feminine, but it is not about biological sex. Rather, it names a dynamic in the psyche, conception and form, impulse and containment, projective fire and receptive soil. Creative work requires both. Jungian work frequently uses gendered metaphors to describe psychic functions, animus and anima, for instance, but the practical point is structural. Effective creation needs an impetus and a form. If your life is all initiative without reception, you produce noise or burnout. If it's only receptivity, you attract but cannot direct. Integration of gender within means cultivating the capacity to begin and to receive, to take responsibility for projects while also letting them be shaped by feedback and nourishment. Example, Priya runs a non-profit and is brilliant at launching programs. She has a strong initiating streak, ideas, execution, speed, but she resists delegation and rarely pauses to receive feedback. Projects launch energetically, but fizzle because they lack sustained community input and adaptive form. Conversely, her co-founder, Marcus, excels at listening and sustaining operations, but rarely proposes new initiatives. When they learn to balance initiation and reception, Priya inviting structured feedback, Marcus offering a forward proposal now and then, their work gains both momentum and resilience. For 1 week, track your default tendency for any decision. Did you initiate a choice, or did you respond to someone else's initiation? Each evening, write a short note. One time you could have initiated but didn't, and one time you initiated but forgot to invite feedback. Try a small experiment. In the next meeting, take on the role you avoid. Either propose one thing or intentionally pause and solicit 3 perspectives. Gender balance in the psyche is not a neat dial you flip once. Many cultural messages push one pole as more valuable. The work is to recover both capacities ethically. Do not use gender metaphors to justify rigid gender stereotypes or to dismiss structural inequities that restrict people's ability to initiate or receive. Now, having placed every law, let us pull them together into a synthesized model you can use as both an explanatory map and a practical itinerary for change. Think of the 7 laws as a mechanical system. Mentalism frames, correspondence mirrors, vibration charges, polarity reveals disowned energy, rhythm paces the journey, cause and effect translates into habit, and gender arranges energy into creative form. Read together. They describe how thought becomes experience across inner terrain and social fields. A lived arc, mapping the laws onto the process of individuation. Imagine the process as a spiral through which you pass repeatedly at different depths. The first tilt is recognition. Mentalism wakes you to the fact that you are telling a story about your world. Correspondence provides the shock. The mirror shows you where you are out of alignment. Vibration makes the shock felt, sudden anxiety, desire, or numbness. Polarity splits you and demands that you decide whether to reject or reclaim an aspect. Rhythm teaches you patience. What appears as failure may be a consolidation phase. Cause and effect makes clear that you must convert insight into practice. Gender asks you to balance the courage to move and the discipline to receive. Each circuit refines the crucible. Why integration increases the odds that thought becomes lasting experience. When projection and reactive habit are reduced, the mind's framing becomes more faithful to reality. Attention is less hijacked by old narratives. Affect regulation produces more consistent behavior. Polar energy is channeled rather than disowned. Rhythms are honored rather than fought. Intentional microactions create a cumulative leverage. And balanced initiation and reception shape projects that survive social testing. The result is not magic, it is increased probability. In practical terms, the world responds differently to a person who reliably embodies a new interior posture than to a person who fantasizes about change but behaves inconsistently. A case study: Mara's descent, choices, and partial integration. To make this less abstract, here is a concrete figure, Mara, whose arc shows the laws in real time. Mara is a mid-career teacher whose inner voice had long whispered that she was not enough to take artistic risks. For years she daydreamed of writing but never began. At 50, a relationship break triggers the call. She experiences a sudden emptiness that cracks the old map: mentalism. The divorce is a mirror that shows themes she had avoided: long-standing resentment and a hunger for recognition, correspondence. The feelings arrive intense and raw: grief, shame, a sudden rush of anger, vibration. Mara notices that when she permits herself anger briefly, it appears as ferocious self-criticism. When she denies it, she slips into a vague depression, polarity at work. She chooses to enter therapy and begins a modest set of practices. She keeps a rhythm journal and recognizes her energy is highest mid-morning and dips late afternoon. Rhythm. She translates her longing into micro-actions. 20 minutes of writing each morning, sending 2 short pitches a month to small journals, cause and effect. She also tries a gender experiment. She deliberately proposes a collaborative reading series, Initiation, while also inviting 3 local artists to co-design the first event, Reception. Here we see gender steering creation into a form that can be sustained. Complications arise. In the descent, Mara faces a period of despair where old identity markers collapse. She questions whether she is making a mistake. This nigredo phase is painful. Her protective habits urge her to return to safety, taking up overtime grading to avoid writing. Yet because she has built small habits and community supports, a therapist, a writing partner, a weekly scheduling ritual, she survives the low cycle and returns to practice. Over 18 months, editors publish her essays, and her reading series gains a small but devoted audience. Her life is not magically transformed overnight. It shifts because inner reorientation and disciplined acts produced cumulative effects. So here's what this really shows. None of these laws erase difficulty. They don't protect you from struggle. What they give you is containment, a way to work with difficulty instead of being consumed by it. The real obstacles are almost always the same: projection and habits you keep repeating without noticing. But when small actions are aligned with inner change, they don't stay small for long. They create ripples in how people respond to you, in what opportunities stay open, and in what you can actually sustain without burning out. Balance matters. When you learn how to initiate without forcing and receive without collapsing, work stops feeling like self-violence. Support begins to appear where exhaustion used to live. Now, if you're wondering how to actually test this, not as an idea but in your own life, think of it as a 60-day experiment, not a transformation sprint, just a steady, workable process. For the first couple of weeks, the focus is simple: how you set your inner posture. Each morning, just 5 quiet minutes. You're not visualizing outcomes. You're tuning the state you want to inhabit: calmer, more deliberate, more present. One feeling, one posture. And at night, you just notice, did the day respond differently when that tone was present? Then the focus shifts outward, to how the world mirrors you back. Whenever someone triggers you, pause. Don't analyze them. Ask instead, what in me is being touched here? Name the feeling, maybe even an old pattern it connects to. And once a week, make sure you're not doing this alone. Share what you're seeing with someone grounded. As you move forward, attention turns to mood and energy. 3 times a day, you reset your nervous system. A few slow breaths, your feet on the ground, one sentence that reorients you. Not to suppress emotion, but to stop being driven by it. Over time, you start seeing how emotional states shape outcomes more than you realized. Later, you begin working with the parts you usually reject. Traits you dislike in others often point to energy you haven't integrated yet. Instead of acting it out or denying it, you learn to acknowledge it, briefly, safely, without drama. That alone changes how intensely it shows up in your life. Around this point, rhythm becomes impossible to ignore. You start noticing when your energy naturally rises and falls, and instead of fighting it, you plan with it. Demanding work goes where energy is high. Restoration becomes intentional, not accidental. Then comes action, but small, precise action. Each day, one behavior aligned with what you're trying to change. Not heroic moves, just something repeatable. You watch how the world responds. You adjust. This is where inner work becomes visible. And finally, balance. You pay attention to when you initiate and when you only react, when you push and when you avoid receiving feedback. Creation stabilizes when those two forces begin to cooperate instead of compete. Throughout all of this, two things matter more than anything else. One, someone who can reflect you honestly, so you don't disappear into your own blind spots. And two, a minimal routine, sleep, movement, and a way to close the day that keeps you anchored while deeper material shifts. Before we close this section, two cautions. Don't weaponize these ideas. Insight without ethics becomes manipulation very quickly. And remember, inner work expands agency, but it does not erase reality, other people's choices, structural limits, or chance. Use these tools to act responsibly within what you can influence. Second, remember structural realities. Inner work increases probability and refines agency, but does not erase inequalities, systemic barriers, or the unpredictable nature of other people's choices. Use the laws to enlarge your sphere of influence responsibly, not to blame yourself for conditions beyond your control. A closing alchemical image and the practical takeaway. Return again to the crucible. The alchemists did not expect instant transmutation. They worked with heat, observation, and patience. You are tending a process. Mind stuff enters the crucible as thought, feeling, image, and habit. When framed consciously, mentalism. When you notice the mirror, correspondence. When you learn to steady your nervous system, vibration. When you stop splitting off denied parts, polarity. When you respect cycles, rhythm. When you translate aims into daily leverage, cause and effect. And when you pair initiation with receptivity, gender, the interior chemistry changes. Gold in this language is a life that participates in the world with more coherence, responsibility, and creative capacity. The work is costly at times. Expect moments of confusion, grief, and test. Plan supports. Be kind to yourself, but also expect small returns, shifts in attention, better responses from others, a steadier presence that accumulate into meaningful change. You are not being promised a magic trick. You are being offered a map and tools to increase the odds that your inner changes will be reflected in your life. That is agency, not omnipotence. Responsibility, not entitlement. Take the crucible seriously. Tend it with discipline and care. In the alchemical sense, you are making gold out of your inner material, not to dominate, but to live with greater integrity and service in the world. And if you stayed with this all the way to the end, that says something about the kind of inner work you're willing to engage in. So write in the comments, I stayed until the end. Right now, I'm leaving another video on your screen that continues this exact thread, moving from inner patterns into lived change. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.